7-year-old Emma stands in the doorway of the living room, clutching a crayon drawing against her chest. The paper trembles slightly in her small hands, a rainbow-coloured house with stick figures she's labelled Mommy, Daddy, and Me in shaky block letters. Her parents sit on opposite ends of the couch, her mother scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference. Her father's eyes locked on the television screen, where headlines scroll endlessly across the bottom. Emma takes 3 tentative steps forward. "Look what I made," she whispers, then louder, "Look what I made for us." Her mother glances up for a fraction of a second, just long enough to register the interruption, before returning to her screen. Her father doesn't move. Emma stands there for what feels like forever, the drawing growing heavier in her hands, her smile slowly dissolving into something smaller, quieter. She backs away, returns to her room, and carefully places the drawing in a box under her bed with all the others. This is how invisibility is learned. This is how a child's nervous system begins to wire itself for dismissal, how the brain starts cataloguing evidence that their voice doesn't matter, their presence is optional, their joy is an interruption. In homes across the world, children like Emma are discovering that safety lies not in being seen, but in learning to make themselves small enough to avoid disappointment. They're mastering the art of emotional disappearance, becoming experts at reading the room and finding it lacking space for them. And years later, when they walk into rooms as adults, they will carry this programming in their bones, the quiet certainty that they must earn their right to exist in every space they enter. There's a quiet truth about children who grow up ignored. They often become adults who struggle to believe they deserve attention at all. There's a quiet truth about children who grow up ignored. They often become adults who struggle to believe they deserve attention at all. Watch them walk into a room. You'll see it in the way they hover near the doorframe, hesitating before they enter. The way they choose seats along the edges, never the center. The way they speak, if they speak at all, in measured tones, as if their words might be too much, too loud, too inconvenient. These are the adults who apologize for existing before anyone has suggested they shouldn't. You know the ones? They're the colleagues who never speak up in meetings despite having the best ideas, the friends who deflect compliments like they're dodging bullets, the partners who ask, "Is this okay?" before expressing the smallest preference. They move through the world as if they're perpetually taking up too much space, even when they're barely taking up any at all. This isn't shyness, this isn't introversion. This is something deeper, more persistent. It's what psychologists call an internalized neglect schema, a fundamental rewiring of the brain that occurred when they were small, vulnerable, and desperately in need of acknowledgement that never came. Picture this. A 7-year-old tugs at their parent's sleeve in a crowded room. "Mommy, look!" they whisper, then louder. "Daddy, see what I made!" But the parent is distracted. Phone calls, conversations, the endless demands of adult life. The child's small hand falls away. Their voice grows quieter. They learn, in that moment and thousands like it, that their needs are secondary, that their voice is an interruption, that safety lies not in being seen, but in becoming invisible. The brain, magnificent and adaptive, takes careful notes. It catalogues each dismissal, each moment of being overlooked, each time enthusiasm was met with indifference. It begins to craft a survival strategy. If I make myself small enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough, maybe I won't get hurt. Maybe I won't be too much. And so the child learns to shrink. They master the art of reading rooms, of sensing when their presence might be unwelcome, of becoming so attuned to others' needs that they forget they have any of their own. They become experts at invisibility, not because they chose it, but because it was the safest place to hide. This adaptation follows them into adulthood like a shadow. In boardrooms and bedrooms, at parties, and in quiet moments alone, they carry this programming, the certainty that they must earn their right to exist in every space they enter. Recognize that if you feel like you must shrink or become invisible, this isn't a character flaw, it's a learned response. Your first step to healing is simply acknowledging, this feeling has a source and it's not my fault. But understanding this is just the beginning. Because what most people don't realize is how this damage actually occurs. What if I told you that some of the deepest wounds come not from what happened to you, but from what didn't happen? We understand dramatic trauma. We can wrap our minds around the obvious cruelties, the raised hand, the screamed insults, the locked doors. These leave marks we can point to, stories we can tell, injuries that make sense to a world that demands visible proof of pain. But emotional neglect is the silent killer, the wound that doesn't bleed, the trauma that happens in the spaces between words. Picture two children. The first is yelled at, criticized, perhaps even hit. Terrible, yes, but this child knows something happened. They have a story, a villain, a clear source of their pain. The second child simply isn't seen. Their questions hang in the air, unanswered. Their excitement is met with distracted nods. Their tears fall in empty rooms. Years later, the first child may say, "My parent was abusive." The second child says, "Nothing really happened to me. I had a normal childhood." But that second child is wrong. Something did happen. A profound something. The absence of something essential. Every developing child has 3 fundamental needs that must be met for healthy emotional development. John Bowlby, the pioneering psychologist who gave us attachment theory, identified these as the holy trinity of childhood security: safety, stimulation, and connection. Safety means predictable care and protection. Stimulation means engagement with their developing minds and interests. Connection means emotional attunement, the sense that their inner world matters to someone who matters to them. When a child reaches for their parent and finds empty air, their nervous system registers this as a threat. When they share their joy and receive silence, their brain catalogues this as rejection. When they need comfort and find none, their developing psyche learns that they are alone in managing their emotional world. The neglected child doesn't just feel disappointed, they feel invisible. They begin to question not just whether they matter to their parents, but whether they matter at all. Unlike the abused child who knows their parent is the problem, the neglected child often concludes that they are the problem. They weren't interesting enough to capture attention. They weren't important enough to be remembered. They weren't worthy enough to be prioritized. This is particularly devastating because children form their sense of self through the mirror of their caregiver's attention. When that mirror is cloudy, cracked, or altogether absent, the child struggles to develop a clear sense of who they are. They may grow up feeling like they're performing a role they never auditioned for, wearing a costume that never quite fits. The forgotten birthday, the interrupted story that was never resumed, the not now that became not ever. The homework proudly completed that went unnoticed, the nightmare that was weathered alone, the achievement that sparked no celebration. These aren't just disappointments, they're the building blocks of a fundamental belief. I don't matter. What makes emotional neglect so insidious is its very invisibility. There's no bruise to photograph, no dramatic incident to reference. The trauma exists in the accumulation of absences, in the slow drip of indifference that eventually floods the foundation of self-worth. Stop minimizing your experience by saying, "Nothing bad happened to me." Absence of something essential is trauma. Practice this validation. My emotional needs were real and valid, even if they went unmet. But if a child is ignored, if their needs are met with silence or inconsistency, they don't just feel disappointed in the moment. They internalize a dangerous belief. Here's what nobody tells you about ignored children. Their brains are literally rewiring themselves for rejection. Inside the skull of every neglected child, a profound transformation is taking place. Not the kind you can see on X-rays or MRI scans, not immediately. This is cellular level change, neural pathway reconstruction, the fundamental rewiring of how a human being processes the world around them. When a child's emotional needs go unmet, their nervous system doesn't just feel disappointed, it activates. The same stress response that would fire if they were being chased by a predator kicks into gear when they're consistently ignored by their primary caregivers. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods their developing brain. Adrenaline surges through their small body. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm system, begins to sound warnings that never quite turn off. But here's the devastating part. While the body is screaming danger, there's no visible threat to fight or flee from. The threat is absence. The danger is indifference. The enemy is silence. So the child's nervous system does what it's designed to do. It adapts. It learns. It prepares for a world where rejection is the baseline expectation. Think of the brain as a vast network of highways. In a securely attached child, there are well-paved roads between the emotional centers and the regions responsible for self-soothing, trust, and connection. Traffic flows smoothly. The child learns that distress leads to comfort, that calling out brings response, that they are inherently worthy of care. In the neglected child, these highways never get built properly. Instead, alternative routes develop. Neural pathways that bypass trust and lead directly to self-protection. The brain builds superhighways to hypervigilance, rejection, sensitivity, and emotional self-sufficiency. These become the default routes for processing human interaction. The child's nervous system becomes exquisitely attuned to signs of dismissal. A slightly distracted expression, a delayed response, a change in tone. These register as confirmation that rejection is imminent. The brain, trying to protect its owner from further abandonment, begins to expect the worst. It creates a protective shell of anticipatory withdrawal. Unlike physical neglect, which leaves scars you can see, emotional neglect leaves scars hidden beneath the surface. The ignored child may appear fine. They eat, they sleep, they go to school. But inside, their neural architecture is being shaped by absence. Their stress response system is being conditioned to fire at the slightest hint of disconnection. This isn't drama. This isn't oversensitivity. This is neuroscience. Brain imaging studies show that children who experience chronic emotional neglect develop measurably different neural structures than their securely attached peers. The areas responsible for emotional regulation, self-worth, and interpersonal trust show decreased activity. The regions governing threat detection and self-protection become hyperactive. Years later, when these children become adults who freeze in social situations, who interpret neutral expressions as rejection, who feel their heart race when someone takes too long to text back, they're not being too sensitive. They're responding from neural pathways carved by years of emotional abandonment. Understand that your anxiety and fear of rejection aren't personality flaws. They're your nervous system trying to protect you. Practice this self-compassion. My brain was doing its best to keep me safe. But to understand how deep this programming goes, let me take you back to where it all begins. Imagine being 8 years old and running home from school with a drawing you're proud of. Your small feet pound against the pavement, backpack bouncing, that precious piece of construction paper clutched carefully in your hand. You've drawn your family, stick figures with oversized smiles standing in front of a house with a crooked chimney and flowers that look like colorful explosions. Your teacher said it was wonderful. You can't wait to show Mum. You burst through the front door, breathless with excitement. Mum, look what I made. But she's on the phone, hand raised in that universal gesture for wait. You stand there, drawing extended like an offering, while she discusses grocery lists or schedules, or something infinitely more important than your art. Minutes pass, your arm grows heavy, the excitement in your chest begins to deflate like a punctured balloon. Eventually, she glances over. "That's nice, sweetie," she says without really looking, phone still pressed to her ear. "Why don't you put it on the refrigerator?" This happens on a Tuesday, and again on a Thursday when you want to share something funny that happened at recess, and again next week when you master riding your bike without training wheels, and again and again and again until you stop running home with news, until you stop expecting anyone to care about your small triumphs. Until you learn that your excitement is an inconvenience, your achievements are interruptions, your very self is too much. This is how the ignored child becomes the adult who ignores themselves. Fast forward 20 years, that same child, now grown, sits in a performance review receiving genuine praise for exceptional work, but instead of feeling proud, they feel uncomfortable. The compliments bounce off them like rain on a windshield. "I was just doing my job," they deflect. Anyone could have done it. They've become so skilled at dismissing their own accomplishments that they can't even recognize them anymore. The adult consequences of childhood emotional neglect manifest in patterns so consistent they seem almost scripted. These are the survival strategies that kept them safe as children, now playing out in boardrooms and bedrooms, in friendships and romantic relationships. The fierce independent has learned that needing others is dangerous. They pride themselves on never asking for help, on handling everything alone. They'll work themselves to exhaustion before admitting they're overwhelmed. They've convinced themselves that self-reliance is strength, not realizing it's actually a protective wall built from childhood disappointments. The high achiever believes their worth lies in what they produce, not who they are. They chase external validation through accomplishments, always moving the goalposts higher. No achievement feels sufficient because deep down, they're still that child desperately trying to earn attention through performance. The Peacekeeper has become hyper-attuned to others' emotions, constantly scanning for signs of disapproval or conflict. They sacrifice their own needs to keep everyone else comfortable, believing that their role is to make others happy, never to be happy themselves. They've mastered the art of emotional invisibility. The Withdrawn has decided that disconnection is safer than disappointment. They keep relationships surface level, share nothing real, and maintain emotional distance from everyone. They've learned that not trying hurts less than trying and being ignored. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior found that adults who experienced childhood emotional neglect were 30% more likely to report chronic loneliness, even when surrounded by people. They could be in a room full of friends and still feel fundamentally alone, because they learned early that their inner world was something to be hidden, not shared. Identify your coping pattern, independence, achievement, peacekeeping, or withdrawal, and practice this weekly ritual. Celebrate one small win by telling yourself, "I did something good today, and it matters." But beneath these strengths is often exhaustion. And yet, here is the paradox. The ignored child often becomes one of the most empathetic adults you will ever meet. Walk into any helping profession, therapy offices, social work agencies, non-profit organizations, teaching hospitals, and you'll find them everywhere. The healers who can sense your pain before you've spoken a word. The friends who always know exactly what to say when your world is falling apart. The colleagues who notice when you're struggling and quietly offer support without being asked. These are the adults who were once children scanning their parents' faces for microscopic changes in mood. They learn to read the room not as a social skill, but as a survival mechanism. When your emotional safety depends on accurately gauging another person's state of mind, you become a scholar of human behavior. You develop an almost supernatural ability to detect the subtle shifts in tone that signal incoming storms. They can spot fake smiles from across a room. They notice when someone's laughter doesn't reach their eyes. They feel the tension in a conversation before the words turn sharp. Their nervous systems became finely tuned instruments, calibrated to detect emotional weather patterns in everyone around them. But this gift came at a price. While they were busy learning to attune to others, they were learning to ignore themselves. They became fluent in everyone else's emotional language while losing touch with their own. They can tell you exactly what their friend needs after a breakup, but they have no idea what they themselves need after their own disappointment. They may tune in to everyone else while tuning out themselves. This creates a strange form of identity confusion. Having never been truly seen for who they were, they learn to discover themselves through reflection in others. Like a person trying to see their own face without a mirror, they could only understand themselves through the responses they received. But if those responses were consistently absent or dismissive, they developed a fragmented sense of self. Pieces of identity borrowed from others' reactions, never quite forming a coherent whole. They became emotional chameleons, adapting their personality to what seemed to be wanted or needed in each situation. Not from manipulation, but from genuine confusion about who they actually were beneath all the adaptations. Their authentic self was buried so deep under layers of survival strategies that even they lost track of where to find it. In relationships, this paradox creates both profound connection and devastating loneliness. They can offer others the kind of understanding they themselves never received, but they struggle to ask for or even recognize what they need in return. Honor your empathy as a superpower, but set this boundary. Once a day, ask yourself, what do I need right now? And actually listen to the answer. Your needs matter as much as others. This discovery leads us to perhaps the most important question: can this pattern be changed? But here's what science has discovered: that quiet hope you carry. It's actually your brain's blueprint for healing. For decades, we believed that the brain you were born with was the brain you were stuck with. That neural pathways carved in childhood were permanent grooves, unchangeable as scars in stone. We thought that if trauma rewired your nervous system for rejection, you were doomed to a lifetime of expecting dismissal. We were wrong. The discovery of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and create new neural pathways throughout life, has revolutionized our understanding of trauma recovery. The same brain that learned to expect rejection can learn to expect acceptance. The same nervous system that wired itself for invisibility can rewire itself for connection. But healing doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in moments so small they might seem insignificant to outside observers. It happens when you look in the mirror and practice saying, "I matter," until your reflection stops feeling like a stranger. It happens when you catch yourself apologizing for existing and consciously choose to take up space instead. Every time you honor a feeling instead of dismissing it, you're building new neural pathways. Every time you ask for what you need instead of pretending you need nothing, you're strengthening connections between self-awareness and self-advocacy. Every time you celebrate a small win instead of minimizing it, you're literally rewiring your brain to expect acknowledgement. These moments become revolutions because they push back against years of silence. Picture this moment of healing. You're at a work meeting and you have an idea. Your old pattern would be to stay quiet, convince yourself it wasn't good enough, but you take a breath and share it. Nothing dramatic happens. It's just discussed like any other idea. But you feel this rush of, you existed. Your voice took up space in the room and the world didn't end. These small acts of self-recognition create what therapists call corrective emotional experiences, moments that contradict the old programming. Each one sends a message to the nervous system. Maybe it's safe to be seen. Maybe your voice matters. Maybe you deserve to take up space. The healing journey often involves learning to become the parent you needed, to notice your own achievements the way a loving caregiver would have, to comfort yourself during difficult moments instead of pushing through alone, to celebrate your progress instead of focusing only on how far you still need to go. And here's the profound part. When adults who are emotionally neglected begin to heal, they often break generational cycles. They become the ones who notice their children's excitement. They become the parents who put down their phones to really listen. They become the partners who ask, "How was your day?" and actually wait for the answer. Start your healing journey with this daily practice. Each morning, look in the mirror and say, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." It may feel awkward at first, but you're literally rewiring your brain to expect acknowledgement. By daring to heal, they open the door for others to heal too. The psychology of the ignored child is a story of pain, yes, but also of extraordinary resilience. It's the story of how silence can create wounds, but also how breaking that silence can create wisdom. We've traveled together through the landscape of invisible wounds, from that first moment when a child learns to shrink, through the hidden nature of emotional neglect that leaves no visible scars, into the neurological reality where young brains rewire themselves for rejection. We've witnessed how these adaptations follow them into adulthood, creating patterns of fierce independence, relentless achievement, exhaustive peacekeeping, or protective withdrawal. But we've also discovered the beautiful paradox that these same wounded children often become the most empathetic adults among us. Their pain became their superpower, their sensitivity born from survival transformed into an extraordinary ability to see and hold others' suffering. What was meant to diminish them actually expanded their capacity for human connection. And perhaps most importantly, we've learned that healing is not only possible, it's happening in small moments every day. Every time someone chooses to speak up instead of staying silent, every time they celebrate their wins instead of dismissing them, every time they ask for what they need instead of pretending they need nothing, they're literally rewiring decades of programming. Being ignored shaped them, but it doesn't define them. The same brain that learnt rejection can learn acceptance. The same nervous system that expected dismissal can expect acknowledgement. Their pain has become the foundation for wisdom, their wounds the source of their strength. So if you were that child, if you ever sat in your room waiting for someone to notice you, if you learned to make yourself small to avoid disappointment, if you grew up believing that your voice was an interruption and your needs were too much, this is for you. Your feelings mattered then. Your excitement about that drawing was valid. Your need for attention wasn't selfish. Your desire to be seen wasn't too much. The child who tugged at sleeves and waited for acknowledgement deserved every bit of care they sought. It mattered then, and it matters now. You matter now. The room you walk into today doesn't have to be the same as the rooms of your childhood. You can choose to take up space. You can choose to speak your truth. You can choose to celebrate your wins and honor your needs. You can choose to break the silence that once defined your world. And in doing so, you become living proof that the story can change. That ignored children can become seen adults. That invisible wounds can become visible wisdom. They were never truly invisible. They were simply waiting to be seen.